And we we are Section 39, so we work with the HSE. We do a couple of things. We do information, education, and service delivery as well. But the purpose of today is really to provide, I suppose, a migraine 101. So we may assume you may not be migrainer, and if you are migrainer, it may reinforce a few points, and you may be highly relatable. So one of our key motto is it's not just a headache, and we're going to labor the point throughout, and you will understand why. But let's take a quote from one of our Migraine Ireland member. People think she or he exaggerating, no external signs. People are not aware when he or he's having a challenging day. They think they're antisocial, lazy, unreliable, flaky, being dramatic. Ah, you sick again, or just take a tablet and you'll be grand. And you'll see that's not really the case. Actually, migraine is actually far more complex than people may think.
So just to go through the agenda, what we're going to discuss in this talk briefly. So we're just going to look at what migraine is and look through the general symptoms of migraine, which is not an exhaustive list because migraine is very individual to everybody who gets it. Look at the phases and the types or the subtypes or variants of migraine. Migraine medications, we're not medics, so we won't go into specifics with medication, but we'll look at the different pathways of treatment. Um, and some of the diagnostic challenges that people experience. Then we'll look quickly at migraine triggers and the threshold, and then look at the impact in the workplace and some workplace triggers, and then just some lifestyle tips, and of course programs and services that we run ourselves. So that's just the basics of the talk today.
So, what is migraine? So, first and foremost, it's important to know it's a complex neurological condition. The exact cause of migraine is unknown. So, obviously, if I oversimplify, it's brain activity, which would have an impact on the blood vessels in the brain and would activate or inhibit the pain pathways. So that's roughly it. It's far more complex than this. Uh, Migraine often begins at puberty, and it tends to affect people between the age of, I suppose, 17, 18, up to 55. A lot of people do carry the flame of migraine way beyond their 50s, especially in men, but also, women. I think, you would think you would welcome the menopause and it would be it. No, unfortunately, we know some people who do carry migraine as a condition way beyond this. So, speaking of which, I think it's 70% women, 30% men and children. Uh, Roughly in Ireland, it's estimated there's roughly 700,000 migraineurs in Ireland. So 100 million in Europe. In the UK next door, for example, it's uh, it's around 10 million. Anyway, it's around probably 10 to 12% of any population, be it a country, a county, or a company to a certain degree. The WHO does describe migraine as the second most disabling disease worldwide and the first for under 50s. So staggering. And worldwide, actually, the WHO reckons there's 1.1 billion people who live or experience migraine. And you will understand why, because it's far more, it's just not a headache. So you'll see it throughout the presentation.
So just a quick look at some of the general symptoms of migraine. Now, this is, like I said, it's not an exhaustive list, and some people may experience some of these symptoms and others may not experience any of them. So if your symptoms are not on this, don't worry about it. There are a lot of symptoms. And like I said, it's unique to you. But generally speaking, the symptoms tend to be moderate to extreme pain, and the pain scale is used as 1 to 10. So, one being something, you're completely fine, there's no pain bothering you at all, and 10 being absolutely excruciating, the worst pain you can experience. Um, if the headache is there, it's not always there, but if it is there, it tends to be one sided and throbbing and made worse by movement. And it can switch sides during an attack, or it can switch sides from attack to attack, or bout to bout. It comes along with moderate to extreme nausea, or and apologies for anybody who might be having their dinner or their tea, vomiting or stomach ache can it comes along with it in a lot of cases, and dizziness, and in more extreme cases, vertigo is they can be very disabling. There's heightened sensitivities. Your migraine brain is already sensitive to the environment around it, but during an attack or a flare up of symptoms, these sensitivities get more heightened. So you're much more sensitive to light, sound, and smell, things like that. Some people get temporary visual disturbances and blind spots. They might suddenly lose their vision or have shapes and that in front of their eyes. Sometimes this can be felt rather than visual. It can be felt in the hands and the face and the arms and legs, and it's kind of pins and needles or numbness. A lot of the time it comes with confusion and clumsiness, and a lot of people call what's called brain fog, which you'll probably find in me as well, because normally during the talk, I'll get some brain fog and forget where I am. Um, it can be very annoying, very disconcerting, because your brain is all muzzy and just confused, and nothing makes sense. And then fear, anxiety, and depression kind of go along with all of that kind of thing, because you've the fear of the attacks, of what's going to happen, fear of the symptoms, anxiety of when it's going to happen again. And a lot of that kind of feeds into depression and low self esteem and things like that, and isolation. And then there's allodynia, which is very, very sensitive skin, which can even be like, a lot of people actually complain that their hair hurts, which it's again because our brains are so sensitive. And then our speech confusion, or aphasia as it's called, it's where you're trying to get the words out but they just won't come out, or if they do come out, they sound more like gobbledygook than what you actually want to say. So that's just an overview of general symptoms, but you can see that the headache is only one part of it, and it's not necessarily the worst part or the most disabling part.
So we have established now it's hope to show you that migraine via the symptoms is multifaceted. Now we're going to take a look at the phases of migraine, and it's always a bit of a struggle for me with this slide because I'm colorblind. But actually, the reason why, and we're going to go into detail. But the reason why we want to show it, it's complex, it's complicated, it's multifaceted. So it's not just a headache, as we keep laboring the point. So you have normal, prodrome, aura, the headache phase, the resolution, the recovery, and the normal. And the main message, the main takeaway for this slide, really in particular, is what is important to understand is once an attack is triggered, it's pretty unlikely you're going to be able to abort altogether. You have to go through all the cycle. You may be able to take some medication, especially acute medication, in order to lessen the severity of the attack, but unfortunately, you have to go through the cycle. So that's important. Now we're going to go into the phases proper and zoom a bit on each one and give you some timelines in terms of each phase as well. And I think by the end of that, we will probably have established a better framework of knowledge for your understanding around migraine.
Yeah, and just to be clear as well, that there are a lot of people who get attacks from time to time, so they would be known as episodic sufferers. But there are a lot of people who live with a lot of these symptoms every day or more often than not. So what we're describing is what would be a typical attack. So when it happens once in a while. So the first phase, generally speaking, is called the prodrome. So that phase starts a few hours to a few days before any of the next phases. Um, these phases, they're not always felt by everybody in every attack, and they can change from attack to attack, but it's just something to be aware of. This, like you said, it's a typical attack. So this is what they look for in paper, the doctors look for by diagnosis and that. So during the first stage, people can feel things like tiredness, mood changes, very thirsty, yawning, a lot of neck stiffness, a lot of peeing a lot, which is one of the more unusual symptoms, but also craving of certain food. And this is where it can get confusing when it comes to the likes of the chocolate, cheese, and red wine, the stereotypical things that people are told trigger a migraine. Some people can definitely point to exact foods that do trigger their attacks. But in some cases, it's believed that when they long for these foods, they're already in the start of the attack, so that they go to the fridge, take out the bar of chocolate, eat it, and then hours a day later, maybe the headache part kicks in, and they think, "Oh, I ate that bar of chocolate. Now I'm after bringing it on." Whereas maybe you didn't. You may not have brought it on. Your body was already craving for something in the chocolate, and you were already in the cycle of the attack at the time. So it's trying to find out whether it's an attack, whether it's an actual trigger, or whether it's part of the prodrome. But this can serve as an early warning. If you can catch, while you're trying to record your migraine, catch these symptoms early, they can serve as a kind of an early warning sign, so that you can be prepared maybe for the rest of the attack. And this, as I said, it can start days to hours before the rest of the attack, and it can last from 2 to 72 hours as well. So that's the first phase, generally speaking.
Phase two, 25 to 30% of people with migraine go through this stage. Symptoms include change to sight, seeing dark spots, sparkle or zigzag, or what I normally call with my best French accent, a kind of a metallic croissant. Numbness, pins and needles, weakness, dizziness and vertigo, which is very disconcerting, really. Speech and hearing changes. Lasts from 5 to 60 minutes. That's a guideline. So again, it shows you it's highly individualized as a condition, and the phases and the cycle as well. So, again, it's a typical one. It can vary from one individual to another.
So the third phase, which is generally speaking the main attack, or the headache phase, which, as we saw earlier, it usually involves throbbing pain, which is made worse by movement, and it's usually one side, but it can switch sides, and it can switch sides during an attack, or from one attack to another attack. Um, it can be quite, sometimes for some people it can be quite difficult to pinpoint, so it can, but it's usually accompanied by nausea and vomiting again. And a lot of people will be extra sensitive to light or sound. So you see a lot of people in the middle of it will try to maybe retire to a dark, quiet room where they can just kind of lie down and let the medication that they've taken try and do its work, and hopefully recover quicker than and not, hopefully not have to go with it for too long. But the headache phase itself alone can last from 4 to 72 hours. So you're talking about a possible headache, like severe throbbing pain, for up to 3 days. So it can be quite debilitating and devastating for some people.
It's for the resolution stage, kind of the welcome stage. However, it's not the last stage. Most attacks slowly fade away. Again, go back to the point that you have to go through the cycle. Some stop suddenly, and allow me to be graphic after vomiting or crying. Sleep. Sleep is a great healer for many chronic conditions, including migraine, and obviously particularly for children. This phase, the resolution stage, again, can be highly individualized. 1 to 4 hours can be more in some cases. But as you may see, it's not the end of the road just yet.
So the final stage, or what's regarded as possibly the final stage, is like the prodrome was the first. This is the postdrome, so the after stage. It's also called the hangover stage, and it has all the lovely symptoms of hangover without the enjoyment of the alcohol, unfortunately. Your brain has just been attacked. It's had all of these changes and everything like this dragged through it. So it can take days for this feeling to go away, and you'd be drained, feel drained, and some people may not be able to lift their heads off the pillow, or you might go into work and you're physically there, but mentally you can't work properly, or you're just not present, and you can it's a horrible stage to kind of, because there's no pain, generally speaking. And a lot of the time the symptoms can be the opposite of the prodrome. So if you peed a lot in the prodrome, you might not need to go to the loo quite as often in this, or you were really depressed in the prodrome. Now you could be really, really happy and euphoric, and everything is just wonderful. And a lot of the time, a lot of people kind of take this as a sign to kind of like get a load of work done. Oh, I'm feeling better. I must get this, and this, and this done. That can be a bit of a dangerous thing, because then that can kind of stress you out and knock you back into the cycle. So you just need to, it's one of the least understood of the phases of migraine, because people, you don't look really sick, but you do not feel proper, you don't feel right. And it can last from 24 to 48 hours. So it can. So you can see that a single attack, if it follows the timelines one after the other, would have the potential to last for up to 8 days. Generally speaking, they don't, but the effects can last that long and can last a bit longer. So you can see that, like, headache, as I said, as we've said, is just one part, and it's not always the worst part. So if you have someone in work who's, maybe feeling drained and not kind of working to their full potential after a while, and they're normally good workers, which migraine sufferers are good workers, it may be because they've just had that brain attack and they're just not with it. Their brain is still recovering from that. So it's just important to keep that in mind if you have people like that.
Type of migraine. So there's roughly 200 types or subtypes. It's also important that migraine can be a primary condition, or it can be a secondary condition. So uh, with sometimes associated with an acquired brain injury, MS, and so on and so on. We're going to focus on six of them roughly. So some are common, some are not. Migraine without aura, the most common type, roughly 80% of all the attacks. So migraine with aura, on the other hand, is 25 to 30% of people experience this. Uh, on that one, we mention it, but don't go and stress and say, oh God, the French dude from Migraine Ireland said something that people suffering from migraine with aura should not smoke because it does increase the risk of stroke. Yes, that's true. But in any doubt, just go and consult. But we want to mention it anyway. Aura with that headache, a bit more rare, obviously. Rarer. 1% of people with migraine experience the aura symptoms of migraine without having a headache. Hemiplegic migraine, another one which is rare. Uh, Basically, as you can see, paralysis occurs, prolonged aura. You cannot function professionally, you cannot function socially with this one. It's extremely disabling. Uh, Vestibular migraine, which is also very disconcerting. Severe dizziness, vertigo, especially when you drive, ataxia, tinnitus, sense of balance is impacted as well. Abdominal migraine, mainly in children. And again, I always end up with the graphic lines, nausea and stomach ache, usually evolved into typical migraine. So we talk children, it's probably preteen. I think, unfortunately, if you move into teen, there's some hormonal changes as well, especially for girls, who tends to kick in as well. And then they move into kind of I suppose, more common known symptoms and type of migraine as well. So as you can see, type of migraine. So obviously you can see it's not, well, obviously not just a headache, but it's multifaceted. It's not homogeneous as a condition. And we'll see in terms of diagnosis as well. There's no biomarkers. So it's one of those conditions which is very difficult to identify and really pinpoint exactly what it may be. It takes time.
So migraine medications. So like I said, that we're not going to go into specific medications. We just look at the treatment pathways, or the way that, or the what they aim to do with the medication. So the first type is the acute treatment, which is the one that's used to try to stop an attack or to treat an attack once it starts. Should be taken as early as possible in the headache phase. It's very hard, as Pascal said, it's next to impossible to stop an attack once it started, but these can help to lessen the severity of the attack. And the acute treatments can include the over-the-counter medications as well, which is why we have a thing called why we have the thing there that says beware of MOH. So medication overuse can occur when people take a lot of over-the-counter medications or a lot of acute, even the migraine-specific acute medications like the triptans. Um, if they're taken too often and too many, they can in turn start to trigger what's called medication overuse headache, which is a secondary headache condition that will constantly be in the background and can affect your own experience of migraine. Unfortunately, it's something that it's a very, very easy trap to fall into. And anyone who falls into it is not their fault. They're just not receiving adequate or appropriate treatment. It's very, very easy to fall into because if you have pain, you want a painkiller. So you go and you buy a painkiller. And the more you use a painkiller, the more it wants a painkiller, and so on and so forth. So it's a bit a vicious circle. But there are ways around it. And if you talk to your doctor, you can actually keep away from that trap. But it's just something to be very aware of, because if you do end up with medication overuse headache, it can reduce the effect of your other treatments, like your preventative treatments or your acute treatments. So just be very aware of how often and how many acute medications that you might take. Your preventative medications, then exactly what it says on the tin, it aims to prevent attacks, but it reduces generally the frequency of attacks and the severity of those attacks as well. That's the aim of it. Again, it takes time to figure out what medications suit you. So what might work for me may not work for you, because all of our brains they're as individual to us as our fingerprints. So that means that there is no, unfortunately, one size fits all with migraine. And that's part of why it's so difficult to understand and to diagnose and that kind of thing, because it's so individual and different people will experience different things. Then there's alternative treatments. There's a massive, massive caveat over this. There are a lot of people out there who are happy to prey on vulnerable people and will offer you all sorts of cures and tonics and what Pascal likes to call snake oil. They're snake oil merchants that will promise you the sun, moon, and stars. If you take this, your migraine will be gone forever. Unfortunately, there is no cure for migraine. So if anybody tells you that they've cured it, they haven't. It can go into remission. It can be reduced to where somebody can function without experiencing attacks for a long time. But generally speaking, it it will come back. It can't be cured. So just be very careful if you're looking for alternative or complementary treatments, and always make sure that you see a registered practitioner and do it through your GP or your neurologist. Acupuncture, yoga, massage, and aerobic exercise have all been scientifically proven to have a benefit for people with migraine. So they are good, but again, find a really good practitioner. There are some devices that are available. There are some devices that you can get on the internet that are not necessarily migraine specific. So you just need to be very careful. This migraine specific devices are mostly available from specialist clinics. And unfortunately, most of them are through referrals to the UK for Irish patients. Again, they show they sorry, here's my brain fog. I could do it one of those devices to try and zap my brain into working order. So they zap your brain, for want of a better word. They put an electric or an electromagnetic signal over your brain, and some of them are aimed at various parts, front and back. Again, to try and disrupt the signals, the brain signals, and some of them can be helpful. But again, specialist clinics, so you just need to be really aware, and they're extremely expensive as well. So just be aware of that. Supplements like magnesium, coenzyme Q10, and vitamin B2 can be very helpful. A really good thing to do would be to talk to a pharmacist about this, and just be aware that just because they're supplements and they might be natural or whatever, does not mean that they will be suitable for you or that they'll suit you, because they do have side effects themselves, and some of them can actually interfere with the working of other medications. So it's just something to be aware of as well. And then again, we ourselves have some management courses and other information and things like that for people who live with chronic and episodic migraine. So they're just kind of the aims of treatment. I hope that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense, Dee. But I'd like to provide some two words of recommendation as well. Whatever type of medications, always under medical supervision. Don't
Yeah.
ever self-diagnose or self-prescribe. Even supplements, you just can kill your liver if you overdo it. As simple as that. So, really, really important that you follow a care pathway with a professional. Diagnostic challenges. There are challenges across a lot of jurisdictions, and then there's Ireland, where we're a bit of an outlier. So, across the board, I would say there's stigma, there's social barriers, uh, there's poor access to treatment, a bit more in Ireland. I will illustrate that with a couple of things. Lack of awareness, uh, and that's really, really important to understand. The main barrier as well is the lack of knowledge about headache among healthcare providers. So, and that's really, really a big variable from one country to another. And I give you some stats. Ireland has 1.2 or 1.3 neurologists per capita, let's say 100,000 people. The average in Europe, broader Europe, not EU, is 9.2. So, for example, so you see the gap straight away. In terms of Georgia, Eastern Europe has 9.3. So that's big. So we are a bit of a laggard and an outlier there. In terms of GP knowledge or undergraduate level, 4 hours on headache disorders and migraine. So many migraineurs sometimes show up at the surgery and they may end up knowing more. So I'm oversimplifying this. It's a bit cliche to a certain degree, but it's contributing to the stigma and lack of access. In Ireland as well, you have Dublin and the Great Divide. By that, what I mean is you may have neurological centers in Dublin, but if you're in Sligo, you don't have any. You have to drive 100 kilometers. Uh, you have public versus private. So all of this is actually a perfect storm. There's also, because of access to diagnosis is long, because migraine has no biomarkers, so it's a bit of an exclusion game to a certain degree. Uh, and rightly so, because I think some HCPs, healthcare practitioners, wants to exclude more sinister scenarios. However, migraine often refer to migraine as the ugly sister in neurology as well. So in a pecking order, uh, we are not a priority in neurology, and that's the reality, which leads roughly a migrainer to spend roughly 8 years before getting a proper diagnosis. You may end up seeing between 5 and 10 specialists. The EMHA, which is the umbrella organization at European level, had carried a survey in 2021 when I think 34% of people were spending roughly the equivalent of 8 years in a waiting room. So that's actually massive. And also, you have the pathology, and we describe the symptoms and, and obviously the phases. But you have other impacts such as anxiety, insomnia, depression, if you move into chronic pain. So we see that people with frequent migraine ever actually, it's a massive impact socially, but professionally, and we're going to see this throughout.
So this is some of the, I suppose, realities of living with migraine. We asked during a survey recently, how does migraine affect your mental health? And people used the words like that you can see there, like debilitating, lonely, misunderstood, sad, despair, and depressed. People have financial worries from missing work. And the biggest challenges that they come across are the pain and disability and the effects of mental health and stigma and the social work, your social, your working, and your school life. And one person, as you can see there, was told not to get a funeral, or not to get a migraine at a family funeral. Sorry, there's the brain fog again. Um, because, as if they had control over them. So it's very misunderstood, and because it's regarded as just a headache, and everybody gets headaches, and if I can take a pill and get better in a few minutes, why can't you? I mean, don't tell me you're sick again and you can't go to this and you can't go to that. Like, what's wrong with you? It can't be just a headache. That increases the stigma, and then that also makes the person who lives with migraine feel really bad and useless and despairing and misunderstood, and so they start to retreat slightly from life. Try to they'll skip family occasions, or they'll try to skip out on work dinners or going out with their friends and things like that, and then they can end up just having very little or no social life, and it can affect relationships, it can affect family dynamics and things like that as well. And like 9 out of 10 migraineurs, as you can see there, are fearful of their next attack. So they're kind of thinking, I don't want to go to that wedding, because what happens if I do have an attack in the middle of it, and everybody be looking at me, everybody be kind of saying, oh, there's Deirdre off again, look at her trying to spoil everybody's day, and all this kind of thing. And it's really, really hard to live with that, because people don't understand what you're going through. And one of the scariest things, or one of the stats that speaks out a lot, I think, is the one down the bottom left there. The average hours that people spend in isolation or darkness per month is 31.8 hours. That's huge, to be spending that time alone, isolated in the darkness, because of this brain disorder that you have, that's trying to rule your life. It has a really bad effect on so many aspects of your life, never mind the pain. So that's why we try to reiterate the point that it is not just headache. There's so much more to migraine than headache. And generally speaking, trying to create awareness, like talks like this, can really help people to understand what other people might be going through, and help them to appreciate that there's more to it.
So, I'll let you take that one. You're pretty good at that.
Okay, so you probably heard us mentioning triggers before. So triggers are a bit of a minefield. Triggers are not the actual cause, as we've seen. They have been implicated in 40% of attacks, so triggering attacks. There is this thing called the migraine threshold, and this is the threshold theory is it's a relatively um, new theory. Basically, there is a tolerance that we all have, where we can tolerate a certain amount of things without triggering an attack or a flare up of symptoms, and that can be you maybe have stress at work, you have a deadline to come in, you missed lunch, and you had a late night. But if you happen to have your period, or if you happen to have extra stress in your life, that can actually take you over the tolerance and trigger a really bad attack or flare up of symptoms. So it's trying to figure out what your triggers are and what your trigger threshold is, and trying to keep your balance is really, really important. Now, triggers are completely unique to the person living with migraine, and they can be vast. They can be anything from the weather, changes in barometric pressure. They can be certain types of foods. Some people can identify foods. They can be stress, good stress and bad stress, smells, light, things like anything at all that affects your brain, that your brain is picking up and that is sensitive to, can be a trigger for you. So the advice is to try and track these triggers, and that in a diary or in an app, in a migraine tracking app, because as you're tracking them, it's as you track your migraines, or your attacks, sorry, the symptom and your symptoms, the triggers can sometimes jump out at you, and you realize that, oh, the last time there was a storm coming in off the Atlantic, my head was bad. I ended up with a really bad attack or a bad flare up. So maybe I'll keep an eye on it the next time. If the barometric pressure changes, and there's another storm coming in, I'll think about maybe I might be more susceptible to an attack when that kind of thing happens. So that would be a way a trigger might make itself known to you, and also a pattern. Patterns can come out over time as well, so that you know that when certain things happen, you might have to just have your medication or have a kind of an emergency, um, like a kind of a migraine kit available to help you to in advance, and that can be really really helpful. The other thing that diaries can be really good for as well are for looking at your medication and showing your doctor how well or how poorly your medication is working for you, so it can give them the clue as to if they need to adjust it, or if they need to change the type of medication or the strength or the dosage or anything like that. But triggers, a lot of people get kind of obsessed with trying to find their triggers. Most things with migraine unfortunately take time, and finding triggers and patterns, they do take time. They're not always that obvious, so it can take a long time to actually figure them out. But people will tell you, oh, you must have done this, and you must have done this, drank water, or not drank enough water or something like that. There is a little bit of there's an element of guilt. What did I do? You didn't do anything. These are triggers that are triggering your brain. Okay, so it's not you. So if you say to yourself, oh, I shouldn't have done that, that's my fault, I've triggered my attack. No, you haven't. It's your brain. So don't feel don't add that element of guilt to yourself, you know. But do try and track them, do try and look at them and look at the patterns and things like that that can actually help you to kind of get a little bit of control back over your life with migraine.
Migraine in the workplace. So, you know, migraine is a paradox. It's so prevalent, yet it's so trivialized as well. I'll give you an example. So today in Ireland, 13,000, so 1 3, just in case my accent is misleading you, 13,000 attacks have taken place. Same yesterday, same the day before, same tomorrow. On any given week, more than 100,000 attacks. So that's quite big in terms of, so the cost to the Irish economy from migraine alone is roughly 260 million euros per annum, just migraine. Uh, Migraine is responsible for the loss of half of the million working days really each year in Ireland. It's massive. Obviously, the reason why it's because it's the most troublesome during people's most productive years. So again, it tends to impact people in their prime. And again, as a condition, uh, a lot of people are still in the workforce as opposed to other conditions sometimes. Uh, the average migrainer takes 2 sick days per year. Lose another four in reduced productivity. It's probably more to a certain degree. Now, one thing which is have always really blown me away is the rate of unemployment in the migrant community is 4 to 5 times greater than the average rate. That's staggering number. Can move to the next slide. So actually, I'm going to keep that one if you don't mind. So there's the reason why we talk about the workplace, because I think it's really relatable for many migranters. Uh, there's genuinely some impact on migranters in the workplace. On career advancement, career are negatively impacted because you may have to take some time off, you may have to retreat, and so on and so on. So this kind of I think sometimes perception is reality in the workforce. I think in the case of migraine, perception is not reality. Actually, for a lot of chronic condition, perception is not reality, especially for invisible condition. So we know of people who have to make some choices from a career perspective, go part-time, uh, the sales job, including jets setting overseas and all these type of things, may not be possible because that's migraine on steroids. Uh, Huge ability to perform sometimes because of the difficulty in terms of concentration. Therefore, there's a knock-on effect. on confidence triggers stress, then triggers more migraine attacks, clarity of thoughts, time management, anxiety, vicious circle, sick leave, you name it. There's a lot of stuff happening. So we got a bit curious, and on the next slide we'll show you. We decided to talk to the migraineurs, uh, uh, you know, in terms of migraine in the workplace. So we did two surveys, one in 2021 and we did another one in 2025 with roughly 600 respondents, which is statistically relevant. There was very little variation, I can tell you. One which was exactly the same was, and actually it was good in a way. 84% of the people surveyed have spoken about their migraine at work. That's good. However, quickly followed by 75% stated that the employer had no support or accommodation. It's important that I stress at that point that migraine has no legal framework. As a condition, it's not an LTI, long-term illness scheme, such as diabetes, for example. So you're not covered. And if you want to prove, for example, if you have hemiplegic migraine, remember the one which is very rare, you have to prove your disability in order to be able to access support. From an accommodation perspective, actually, in education, the Reasonable Accommodation Act does provide uh, some pathways for students who live with migraine. Uh, but overall, 80% stated that the condition had a direct impact on their professional life. 20% said that they had to change their profession. 22%. That's quite a lot. When asked what one would change the workplace, obviously awareness, and we do that a lot. We do a lot of workplace talk. It's really, really important. Flexibility in working hours. Routine is super important for migraine. Actually, routine is important for many chronic conditions, but especially for migraine. And 17% said change of work environment. One of the benefits of COVID, because there was one, which was actually hybrid and remote work for migraineurs. The ability to manage your environment. And we will see later on, I think Dee will take you through some slides where it makes sense. So those stats in itself are pretty staggering. And that's something which is, more than just a headache. You can see it, has a genuine impact on people day in, day out.
We found some of the evidence of the stigma that we mentioned in this survey as well. Things like bullying, migraine being used against the person, people getting written warnings because sick leave is used up, and people having to use some um, holiday time and leave and that kind of thing, and people being sent to HR, occupational health, or not being believed, and being discriminated against. A lot of people perceived as being lazy. And one person actually took early retirement rather than even disclose that they lived with migraine. So you can see that a lot of people are experiencing these kind of things in their workplaces, which again leads to more stress, which again leads to more attacks and more symptom flare ups. And that's part of the whole vicious circle. So more needs to be done in workplaces and in other areas to combat this kind of thing.
I'll touch on that, but for example, just to illustrate the previous slide was we often told, migraine is not life-threatening. That's true. But it's not because it could be a bigger problem that it's not a problem that needs to be addressed. So, that's the reality. So we cannot be binary around those things. Internal research, I'm conscious of time and I don't want to hold you too long tonight. So I'm going to skip the first three and I'm going to just give you the express version on Fujitsu. So Fujitsu, 120,000 staff, probably remember 10 to 12% is the ratio per entity, be it a country, a city, or a company. So they have 10 to 15% migraineurs. So what they decided is to have a programmatic approach to it. So kind of a fancy word just to let you know that they build awareness at line management level, executive level. Uh, they empowered the migraineurs to disclose their condition. Uh, a veil of dark rooms and so on and so on. So, cut a long story short, by doing all those things, the productivity went up. When the productivity went up, the profitability went up. The shareholders were happy. On the migrainer, I'm not sure whether they were happy, but actually they were a bit more content. Just to show you that when we reverse the narrative around those things, can happen. Also, bear in mind that we're an aging population. Uh, and while migraine is our, let's say, product today, many of us have or will acquire a chronic condition and will still have to provide for their family and be in the workforce. So suddenly, we cannot become a write-off. I would say 60% of the population will carry something in some shape or form, e.g., blood pressure, anything. So not everybody's under 22 working for fancy Facebook. That's not the reality. So some employers now are starting to realize that you cannot be binary around uh, those problems, and you really need to make some adjustment because otherwise you have a constant turnover, which also have an impact on the content. So that's just one small illustration, and we can go into details, but I suppose for tonight it's late enough. That's enough. Just to show you we can do things about it.
Yeah, so these are just some of the no, I mean a lot of these can apply at home as well as in the workplace. So, but they're just things to be aware of that can maybe help and don't necessarily have to break the bank. Um, and again, remember, migraine doesn't take account of the fact that you have to live a life or that you have to hold down a job or anything like that. It doesn't care. It just wants to do its thing, and it wants you to keep as much of a routine as possible. So, that kind of, I suppose theoretically that keeps it calm. Doesn't necessarily work all the time. So shift work is something that a lot of people cannot avoid. But if you can, as much as possible, avoid it because it is very, very bad for people living with migraine. But if shift work is something you cannot avoid, then the advice is to try outside of the shift work is to try and keep everything else as stable as possible. So your meals, your sleeping, all of that kind of thing, exercise and things like that, keep them as regular and routine as possible. And so that the shift work will have a minimum effect on triggering your symptoms or your flare ups. Um, Something we can all do, no problem, reduce stress. We wish it was easier said than done, but unfortunately it's not, as a lot of to do with migraine is the same thing. It's next to impossible to reduce stress completely. It's very helpful if you have somebody in your corner helping you, especially at work if you have deadlines and that kind of thing that you need to get to. But also good stress can also trigger migraine attacks and symptoms, such as excitement over a birthday or Christmas, or when Santa's coming at Christmas and the kids are all excited. That can trigger an attack in them, the excitement, but they're screaming and they're running around and they're hyperactivity when they're really excited can also trigger that in you as well. So good and bad stress to try and keep them as much to the minimum as possible. Like migraine wants you to be boring, basically, so it does. Now this is a difficult one because again it kind of can get personal. So because we're extra sensitive to smell, a lot of the time people who wear a lot of perfumes or colognes and that kind of thing, especially the heavier ones, they can be very triggering for people with migraines. So it's not easy to ask your colleagues not to wear perfumes into the office. And also you've no control over you're sitting on the bus or the dart or the train and the person who gets in beside you has just literally bathed in Chanel number 5 and you know instantly you start getting triggered. You've no control over that, so it's really difficult to kind of cope with that, but where possible to try and avoid those kinds of smells. And for colleagues who are aware that there may be people in their offices who are affected by these kind of things, knowing that and keeping those things to a minimum can be really, really helpful. But the same goes for chemicals like cleaners, like bleaches and polishes and things like that as well. So just bear in mind the 3 Ps: perfume, petrol, and paint. So those kind of chemical smells can be really bad for people who live with migraine. Posture and screen time again. This can go. This is as much for home as work as well. Screen time. There's blue light coming from your screen, so it's very hard on your eyes. It's very hard on your brain. Your brain is picking up things on your screen that you are not necessarily aware of, that your eyes are not picking up, but your brain is that sensitive that it is picking them up. There is a very slight flicker on your screen that your eyes don't necessarily see, but your brain is picking up that flicker and it's stressing your brain out. So the advice with screen time is to use a little thing for breaks called 20-20-20. Every 20 minutes, look up from your screen for 20 seconds at something that's 20 feet away, and just give your eyes a little bit of a break. Posture. I'm the worst at posture. I really am. I'm terrible at posture. But you're trying to give your posture as much or to hold it as well as possible. Your shoulders and your neck get very hunched up during migraine attacks and flare ups and that kind of thing, as it is, without you adding to the pressure of really bad posture. And like I said, I'm a devil for it. My posture is terrible. It really is, especially when I'm on a computer. Ventilation and lighting can be really, really good to make sure that they are running properly, because any kind of noise or hum from a ventilator or anything like that can really, really irritate your brain. And lighting as well, depending on the type of lighting, can be very harsh. I always say one of the things that Pascal did when he came in to Migraine Ireland first was he turned off the fluorescent lights above our desks and gave us all desk lamps. So we have the ability to control our own lighting, and it's softer lighting and that kind of thing. Then it's not the harsh white light. So that was really, really good. Then water and breaks for medication, breaks for possible food, because the advice is not to go for more than 3 hours without food or at least a healthy snack. And people who smoke and vape get breaks to do that. So people with chronic disorders should get breaks to take water and medication and that kind of thing without people getting, annoyed or jealous or something like that, which unfortunately happens a lot. And then, if possible, wherever you are, whether it's in work or at home or anywhere, to have a quiet, dark room that you can go into to try and let your medication start or work for you, to give yourself that little bit of peace and quiet, and try and rest for a while and rest your eyes and that kind of thing. It can be anything, it can be a broom closet in work, just drag in a chair, close the door, turn off the light, and you can sit there in the darkness for 10-15 minutes. And for some people, that can make the difference between staying in work and having to go home. So if you can, these are just some of the things that can help. And they don't necessarily have to break the bank. But if there are expenses involved, then employers can avail of certain grants and that kind of thing that are available to cover things like this. So they're just some of the workplace triggers. And I'll just leave you with this. This is the SEEDS acronym: sleep, exercise, eat, diary, and stress. So if you can keep this in mind and watching while keeping an eye, using it to keep an eye on your migraine and everything, it can really help you to kind of get a little bit of control back over your migraine and reduce triggers severity, build up your threshold, and try and keep as much as at bay as possible. And it can help between visits, because we know ourselves, migraine doesn't just happen when you have to see the doctor, or it doesn't just happen when you have an attack. It's there all the time. So you need to be able to help yourself from day to day. So this SEEDS acronym can be a really good way of kind of getting a bit ahead of yourself and getting getting a bit of control back. So I hope that's helpful.
So that, I'm not going to do a plug. See, if you need, we all over the socials. You can get access to us. I think maybe the last word for me is, it's next time you come, if you're a migrainer, you may relate obviously to what we have spoken about. If you're not, I hope that the next time you come across a migraine, you may say, haha, remember, it's not just headache. In any case, whether it's migraine or any other type of chronic condition, I think my only advice is to just be kind. It doesn't cost a lot, and it goes a long way when you live with a chronic condition. Debbie, over to you.